I'm Arin. I'm CEO and founder of WebRTC Ventures, based in Virginia in the US, team members all around North and South America. We do live video integration into applications on a variety of tech stacks, so services firm.
Hi, I'm Jane. I work for Daily. We provide video and audio APIs, WebRTC, and yeah, we're also based all around the world.
Okay, over to you, Tim.
So I'm Tim Panton. I'm the CTO at Pipe. I've been doing WebRTC for a ridiculously long time. But what we're doing at Pipe is building a dedicated special purpose WebRTC stack for running on things like baby monitors, security cameras, generally IoT devices, with the idea that keeping the privacy and the end-to-endness really in there, and trying to avoid kind of being too server-based if we can. And that's been a lot of fun. And I do a little dabbling in building little niche social apps for kind of random things like recording podcasts or book clubs and random things like that.
I guess I'm up next.
Yep.
So I'm Jared. I'm the CEO of LiveSwitch, formerly Frozen Mountain. We've been doing streaming of some sort since 2008 when I founded the company with my brother, and we were one of the early adopters into the WebRTC world. We actually launched the first SDKs for iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac back in whenever it was, 2012 or 13, somewhere early days of WebRTC. So we went through the whole pain of all of those early transitions. And our SDKs have been used in everything from the IoT type devices all the way up to more recently we're powering Adobe Connect, and we built a virtual Thunderdome for the WWE during COVID. So everything from small to large, we've had our fingers in it at some point, I'm sure.
Hey, Florian.
So I think it's my take.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Florian. I'm engineering manager at Element. I'm also working for quite a long time in the field of voice over IP. And recently within the Matrix ecosystem, we are building up video conferencing as a first-class citizen. We call this Matrix RTC, and it's a native, Matrix native version of signaling in the WebRTC ecosystem, and we are creating all the base building blocks for this right now to craft applications like video conferencing, like we have here in the Jitsi use case, or something in the metaverse, which is called in our vocabulary third room. And it's pretty cool, and I'm really looking forward to this nice panel discussion.
Hi, my name is Nikki. I am the lonely marketer on this panel, so please go easy on me and understand that everything I say is going to be very colloquially spoken. I was formerly the CMO at Subspace, which was a startup that had raised $140 million in less than 2 years and went bankrupt last year. So I've got some war story that I'm bringing to the panel today. But Subspace was building a new internet for real time. So with the notion that we could lease fiber optic cable that wasn't being used, and we could deploy new hardware and software solutions across swaths of desert to bring light speed connectivity, limited only by the laws of physics in areas that did not have that sort of connectivity. So I think that the notion that we had, I think that the use cases that we had for everything from real-time massively multiplayer online gaming to customer service calls, I think all of that made sense for Subspace. We just had some startup problems that we experienced along the way, but that's the predominant amount of my WebRTC and Web3 experience was my time at Subspace. I'm now at Apple, where I am offsetting my losses from my time at startups, not doing anything in the Web3 space, but happy to be here today.
Excellent, thank you so much. So what I suggest, Arin, if you could just run through the questions rather than me sort of directing from the back. If you could just sort of run through some of the questions, your views, then just ask the panel this, please.
Okay, all right, happy to do it. So I would like to start with just hearing from our panelists kind of what they see as the current state of WebRTC in general. And maybe we can start with Jared.
Be happy to. So, WebRTC is in a much better state now than it was, 7 or 8 years ago. I'll say that. But it definitely still is not where it could be. I think far and away the biggest challenge still is interoperability, and that's driven by the lack of standards around signaling. We're working on some of the new WIP and web standards and trying to get some ingress-egress protocols a little more defined. It's also a little complicated, although I think that some of the commercial vendors and open source vendors that are doing some stuff around kind of wrapping up the SDKs or the APIs into SDKs are making that a little less of a challenge going forward. But I think overall, like I said, I went through the pain of going through the transition back when there was even ORTC and some of those other protocols back then. So I look at it and say, holy crap, how far have we come? On the flip side, some things are still really nasty. It'd be really nice if Apple played a little nicer. They keep breaking stuff. It'd be nice if they were a little more consistent.
Like a personal attack.
yeah, nothing. No offense there, Nikki. Sorry. Aside from that, I mean, it's really impressive how far we've come. But a lot of the things that are still happening out there, and oh man, there's still quite a ways to go.
I still have a Google alert set up for ORTC. I guess I could delete that at this point. Go back and clean
I think you're probably safe.
Yeah, I think so. Florian, perhaps?
Yeah. So Jared, I think what you covered is more the interoperability part. But what I also would like to have going forward, that some of the base building blocks within the WebRTC stack, echo cancellation, jitter buffer handling, and whatever, would be replaceable. Similar to we have the mechanism with the insert with streams API, and I think this would also going forward help a little bit more to distinguish between the different solutions and to add some value on top of it. And performance, I think, is also an issue. So if I nowadays have a WebRTC conference with, let's say, 8 to 10 participants, you need really a modern computer to handle it. Otherwise, if you have a, let's say, 5-year-old notebook, you will often hear the fan, and that is also impacting audio quality. But however, I think it's a nice framework, it's a common standard, and it's it enables a lot of people to provide a lot of very intelligent and unique video applications dedicated for certain use cases. And I think with the recent SDKs emerging, also the barrier for folks providing WebRTC stuff or video conferencing stuff is really lowered, and this is really nice. This is also why we decided to foster this matrix RTC, but we have a lot of different frameworks out there which really help you to make great stuff in the WebRTC ecosystem.
Florian, do you think a lot of people want to change out some of those jitter buffers and stuff like that? My experience is everybody hates them, just wants them to work.
You're right. You're right. It really depends. So you don't need all this stuff if you have a decent internet connection. So this is the easiest way to fix the jitter buffer thing. Echo cancellation is more challenging. So I would say that would be that could make an impact. So at least there are various use cases. So if you have a TV attached, which adds a lot of video processing, then you have a lot of audio delay, and then you're not in the window of the echo cancellation tracker, and then it doesn't work, blah, 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 blah. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Or when it comes to stereo echo cancellation, we earlier talked about spatial audio and dummy heads and so on and so forth. I think the jitter buffer might be an academic thing, yeah, right. But it would also be nice to change it.
Let's go to Jane here. What's the perspective kind of from Daly's side of things of the state of WebRTC and how you all have addressed it?
Yeah, so I just realized that I didn't really say much about what I do at Daly, but I'm part of the DevRel team, engineering manager there, and I don't really have like a telecom background. I don't really know as much as everybody, like what the state was like 15 years ago. But one of the things that I think that can still be improved a lot is education within for WebRTC. So how to get the community, make it bigger, and how can we make sure that TADSummit, like in 5 years' time, would be like hundreds of people, which would be fantastic, of course, if you can get more folk in. I think there's a lot of room to grow there, and a lot of resources that we're still missing in helping developers either come into the community or help them grow as engineers.
Thank you. Tim, let's go over to you. Is the state of WebRTC dead? Are you going to replace it with web transport and web codecs?
So the state of WebRTC is I think partially a huge success and partially really not. Like I think the wire protocol is a huge success. The fact that like actually I think there are 10 or 12 independent implementations of the wire protocol that all interoperate is like a huge, and there are whatever it is, 2.5 billion endpoints out there. Every browser on the planet will do it in a reasonably interoperable way. It's fantastic. I think that's an incredible achievement. But on the flip side, I think as Jane was kind of hinting, the APIs are scare a lot of people off, and I think there's a problem there, and it's a hard problem to solve. I'm going to do a little advert for a small effort that we're doing here at the moment called WebRTC.nu, which is an attempt to try and bring developer feedback into the standards making process. So encourage you all to go to the WebRTC.nu website and fill in the survey. And the idea is that information will then get pushed to the standards making bodies as kind of developer views. And hopefully, we're only starting with small, simple questions, but I think that feedback into the standards body has been missing. Partly for kind of a bunch of good reasons, but it's just the way it is. So I think hopefully that can help. But to your question about web transport, I actually think like WebRTC has a strong point that I think I'm probably the only person on the panel who uses it, which is that it does end-to-end. Like for our baby monitor customers, the fact that you can do end-to-end without a server involved means that they can monitor a baby even when the ISP goes down. And that's a huge win. The same true for security cameras and stuff like that. But like if you're doing a video conference like this and you've got a server in the middle, you don't really care that WebRTC is capable of doing peer-to-peer. It's sort of unimportant. So I think that's the bifurcation line, and I think that's this kind of thing we're doing here. You could in theory do equally well with web transport, and I suspect we'll end up there in 5-10 years time. But the stuff that I'm doing, the peer-to-peer stuff, controlling robots, controlling baby monitors, stuff like that, you simply can't do with a centralized architecture or not well. So I think like the summary is I think we're at a transition point. I think WebRTC is going to split into two directions at this point.
Thank you, Tim. Let's go to Nikki, and Nikki, I'm going to change it into kind of two questions for you. The first is, kind of let's get into some of those war stories that you referenced in your introduction. What is your perspective on the needs in WebRTC? Obviously, Subspace was trying to address some of those, and that gets to the next question that I'll then ask if anyone else on the panel has a comment on. Who's making money in WebRTC? What are the economics of WebRTC right now? So Nikki, share with us a little bit about the economics that Subspace was addressing and struggled with a bit, it seems.
Yeah, so we started off thinking that our primary audience, so Subspace was a B2B solution, mostly because the cost of deploying our infrastructure was so high that it could not be a consumer product yet, and not to mention the lack of awareness and understanding of costs behind such said infrastructure. So we started off focusing on video games and thinking, okay, this is going to be an industry that has a lot of money and for whom every millisecond really counts, and so that real-time communication is going to be critical. And that was successful with Epic Games maker Fortnite in the Middle East, where our internet was allowing content to be delivered at 300 milliseconds faster than the standard internet, than BGP. And that was fruitful enough for us to raise our Series A, raise our Series B, and really start to build a name for ourselves. But we quickly realized that having that level of improvement in latency was not something that we could replicate in first world areas, not with a delta as great as what we could accomplish in the Middle East. So then we tried to focus on quality of service and quality of experience, right? So jitter, packet loss improvements, a little bit of privacy and security improvements, and hoping that if we started to open up sort of the TELUS and RingCentral and customer service industry with this value proposition of more reliable customer service calls leads to happier customers, leads to more revenue in the long run, that would be the next big sort of industry that we opened up for our company. And we just found that folks weren't willing to pay what we needed them to pay. It just,
Nobody cared?
the need wasn't great enough for the cost. And so one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for the panel was, WebRTC is free, but it's not because it costs a lot to deploy the infrastructure, the networks, the servers. And is the audience, are the target consumers really, are the buyers where we need them to be? Because if the buyers aren't aligned with those costs, then the developers aren't going to put in the effort to create the products to then fuel the industry. And so even before thinking about, or I think it's parallel lines of thought, right? Whether or not the APIs are in a place where the developers can adopt them, but also whether the market is there to warrant the expenditure. And so one of the questions that I had for Tim also was just understanding what initial successes you've seen with the baby monitor and whether or not the associated cost with having this better solution is being paid for, either by the end user or whoever your audience is. And then Jared, LiveSwitch seems to be doing well. What are you doing that Subspace didn't do? Tell me. We're bankrupt now.
Very interesting. I'll let Tim go first. Tim, I don't want to steal your thunder. Go ahead.
So I think the answer is yes, but only in niches. There's a visceral privacy requirement around and low latency requirement about hearing your baby cry or seeing your baby move, and so it's a user need that you're addressing there, which doesn't it doesn't work with bird cameras, because you don't care if a bird camera is running 10 seconds slow, and you don't care that it's being routed via a cloud server in China because it's not private. So it's you end up in the niches, and this comes back to something I think I said to Alan the first time we met, however many years ago it was, at a panel, I think, which is that actually WebRTC and these technologies don't make money in themselves. They're only a means of addressing a niche market. And you have to find what it is that the customer is prepared to pay for, and maybe WebRTC helps you get there.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I agree.
Tech stack.
Sorry, go ahead, Lauren. I didn't mean to.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I didn't. Yeah, it's not the tech stack. It's really the idea and the product you have. You can sell. It's not the servers and not the better latency and not the better video quality.
Yeah, it's the value around it, right? Like if you look at WebRTC, Tim, you mentioned there's the core protocol that's on the wire, right? And that's the thing that everybody interoperates with, and that's great, right? It's the stuff around it that does the value add, right? Like a lot of what we're doing, Tim, we've got some use cases that are like neonatal, right? Where they're monitoring neonatal services in a hospital, and the parents want to watch that, right? Like that's that niche, right? Where there's a real value. And one of the things that we've had some interesting discussions around with some of the businesses is trying to say, hey, what are we providing? Well, if your core business is dependent on some sort of audio or video streaming, shouldn't you be paying for that? It seems like a reasonable ask to say, hey, this is a core function of what we do as a business. maybe I want to invest in the thing that's responsible for making that happen, right? So we try and keep our focus on the ones, I think, Tim, what you're saying, are the ones that are high value, where it's obvious that what we're doing is adding some real value or some level of criticality, right? And we have the redundancies and the ensuring of the quality and everything else that'll ensure that that's possible. But the focus tends to stick around either a niche value, broadcasting in sub-second where there's some sort of interaction with fan experiences is another one, right? You get value from letting your fans interact with whatever it is, whether it's wrestlers or the NBA or Anton Deck in the UK. Like those experiences, they're willing to. There's a specific value and a specific use case that real-time component solves. But anybody who comes to me and says, "Oh well, we want to stand up servers, this much closer to our end users," and the whole thing is real time. It's as close to as instant as you can get, subject to the speed of light. 300 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds. Your users can't tell, so don't worry about that.
And it's also changed over the time. So let's say 10 years back, that might be an issue with 300 milliseconds delay, but people are getting used to it. So nowadays, it's more acceptable.
That's true too.
So
Expectations change.
I have a very slight disagreement there, which is kind of, yes, it's all about niches, but they don't necessarily have to be high-value niches if you can do them peer-to-peer. Like if you can do them peer-to-peer, then it drives the cost down hugely. And so we've built a thing for a book club, and it makes no money whatsoever, but it doesn't cost anything to run it either. I built it for my own book club, and I don't care who else uses it because it costs me nothing to run. And what's interesting about that is that the interaction, the low latency enables a class of interaction that doesn't happen even in something like Jitsi. Because you can have a group of people, one of them can laugh and it doesn't move the video focus, and if you do the stereo mix right and you do the timing right, it doesn't interrupt the flow of the other person's conversation. So you can have those interactions, those little interjections, all of the stuff that you get in the room, but at super low latency and with good audio, you can do it in a virtual space. But I don't believe you can do that with a server. I think the extra 100 milliseconds in a server blows that out of the water.
I agree.
I think you're overstating how much time is spent on the server. I mean, we talk 20 milliseconds.
No. I have an example, a good example. So if you're singing together, then latency is super critical. So here we're talking about 10 milliseconds. It's also a niche, I agree, but this is a use case where it's a good idea too.
So I think I agree to an extent. We do peer-to-peer as well, so we can, users can use our stuff without any sort of server involved if they want. And we do have, again, some of those what I would call lower value, like the Roll20, right? The D&D website. They don't make any money. They don't have paying users really, and I think they officially do, but realistically they don't. So you're right. There are some niche cases where you can do peer-to-peer and you can reduce your costs and so on. So I think maybe there's a separation of ones that are, niches where there is value, but there's no money, no revenue, and then there's value and there is revenue, right? And I think those are definitely two different things. And I'm not saying that, I'm not opposed to somebody building Roll20 on our system. Great, right? That's fun. That's cool. But for me, at least personally, I'm a business owner, and at the end of the day, I also still need to have revenue to pay my employees and stuff. So, I also definitely look for the ones that are the higher value in the long run, because that's the ones that are going to make my business, sustainable in the first place, and hopefully even more successful.
So what are the ones that are high value and high revenue that you have found?
The ones that are the most obvious are education, because everybody's willing to pay for education. So there's an obvious willingness to pay and a need. And that can take all kinds of different forms, everything from K-12 all the way up through continuing ed. So that's definitely happening. Broadcast entertainment, that area has just got lots of revenue, lots of different use cases, everything from just fan walls to selfie cams to sports betting, all that kind of fun stuff, right? Like there's all kinds of opportunities in that particular industry. I'm going to put one out here with a caveat. Metaverse stuff. We have a ton of these metaverse customers that are building really, honestly, very awesome interactive experiences. Like they're pretty phenomenal. The problem with those is I'm 90% sure most of them are funded by VCs. So I don't think they've got a whole lot of money for long. Let me put it that way. So those are interesting. And then there's other ones that are maybe not quite as revenue heavy, but definitely have a high value, which is the healthcare type stuff, right? Like what Tim's talking about, but then also including things like, one-on-one calling for patient and doctor, remote nurses who need to call up a doctor and get a consult, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So those are probably the biggest.
Yeah, one of the not industries, but customers that we had was a startup focusing on remote surgery across continents. And that's one where certainly real-time matters. Yeah. The other one that I've always thought would be interesting is military.
We have a number of, I probably can't get into a lot of that one. Those exist and are definitely a use case. Let's put it that way. In particular in the military in health, it's emergency services, right? That's where the use case is, especially when there's people that are injured from some sort of military operation. How do you provide service to those folks?
Right.
It's definitely an interesting situation there.
I also want to add that there's also quite a few more untapped markets out there. Like, I think that live commerce is something that is continually growing and growing, like people helping you with shopping and things like that. I was wondering if someone else has seen things grow recently.
Yeah, we've got that one. We've actually just recently signed a few groups that are doing live commerce in the sense of the broadcast, promote your product kind of thing, but then also the one-on-one personal shoppers. That's a thing that's just started. It's a lot bigger right now in Asia Pacific than it is in North America and Europe, but we'll see if that continues.
A friend of mine went on one of those shopping channels, demonstrating some craft products. And what was fascinating about that is nearly real time. So she was talking about her products, and the producer would say in her ear, "We're getting a lot of response from that on the website. People are buying that. Say that again, or demo that thing again." So that interesting, that closed loop, and I guess the personal shopper type thing is even that feedback even more. It's tied in. It goes into that whole metaverse thing again, because then they're like, oh, well, can I demo this thing in 3D, and how can I show this to my customer more effectively? How can I communicate? It's about it's about breaking down the communication barrier, right? It's the difference between going to a website and browsing versus going to a store and asking for help, right? So it definitely isn't going to fit for everybody, but there's certainly a use case there.
I think
we're seeing it in moving and stuff too. That's another one that's kind of personal shopper-esque, where anybody who has to go out to a home and do some work at the home, it's a home inspection, moving companies, pressure washing companies, all those kind of guys. They're leveraging that kind of a solution. One click, show me around your house, so I can give you an estimate without having to come out, right? Save them some time.
Yeah. I think those are definitely interesting. Jared, I've seen some of that as well. A lot of the personal shopper that we've seen, I would say, is more, instead of B2C, it's B to HVC, high value customers. So not necessarily a wide range of things,
100%.
but yeah, exactly, very, very high.
You're not going to use it to sell a hammer.
No, probably not. Gold-plated, maybe. But speaking of things that may be gold-plated a lot, and let's come back because we have just a few more minutes. Let's come back to the topic of Web3 and Metaverse. This morning, How described it as a bunch of hot air at a previous conference at WebSummit last week. But Alan has also said this is a no BS conference, so we have to balance the two in this discussion. So let's try our best to balance the hot air and no BS. Jared, you mentioned metaverse a little bit. Jane, I want to start with you. What have you seen in kind of the metaverse space, and do you see an increasing role of WebRTC specifically within that? Metaverse, Web3 more broadly.
Yeah, I see a lot of growth within daily, at least for gaming Web3. Not much. I don't know how much I can say about that right now, but that is definitely growing. Web3 has, of course, even a bigger concern about like community and accepting people within that space. But I think it would be, we can say it's hot air, but it's also something that it's hard to ignore at this point. We at one point, like maybe I want to ask first, like how do we describe Web3 at this point? Like most people, when you say Web3, it's like okay, crypto, NFTs,
Right.
things like that, blockchain. But is that like how do you see like Web3 at this point?
Me personally?
Yes, you personally.
Oh goodness. Well, it does seem to be a lot of hot air, certainly, but I think that there's absolutely things there. I mean, one thing that's, for example, that is not something we're working on, but I think is very interesting and relevant to some of the other discussions here today is the concept of voices and voice interfaces and the increasing use of that and how that will be used beyond in the Star Trek episode that Ben referenced, but in the metaverse especially, and how that's likely to trickle into the rest of our lives. So that's, you know, you could look at that purely as an API and speech recognition and that sort of thing, but there are also possible blockchain identity privacy issues there. Someone mentioned your voice is part of your personal identity and not something that's easy to fake. And then we talk about deep fake videos, which are often recorded, but that could be an issue with real-time video as well. I think it's interesting, you know, what would an NFT for voice look like? I know some people are discussing that, and how could we know for sure that that is that person in that video actually talking before we believe what they're saying, for instance. Someone I think had a comment there. Was that you, Jared?
Yeah, so
Florian, go
so
ahead.
regarding metaverse, or we call it third room and Matrix, so we also within the Matrix ecosystem. So Matrix is not just the chat application, it's a very flexible event system, and a subset of this is the Messenger application, but another subset of this together with the Matrix RTC is the base building blocks to create a metaverse. Thirdroom.io is a good example for this, and maybe use case for this could be a conference like this, so you can have a hybrid conference, so you would see the presentations, the virtual room as well as in the real room, and I think that would really solve an issue. I think the challenge about the metaverse really is to find actual problems you can solve in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree.
Check it out, thirdroom.io, it's pretty cool. It's a really fast game engine running in a web browser doing 60 FPS. That's really impressive.
Most of what we've seen in the metaverse has been around that hybrid virtual event space for now, and I'm sure that's common of others. Jared?
Yeah, so that's it's a fascinating topic to me because, you know, generally speaking, technology takes, you know, 10 to 15 years to get real mainstream adoption, right? Like that's about right. I started working with AR glasses back in 2013-ish, 2014. The company that we were working with back then has since been bought by Lenovo, and, you know, so bigger players are buying up the niche players, which happens in that kind of progressing market. So, you know, I can't really see the folks that are remote there, but I would venture to guess that the average age for those that are in this room is not, you know, the 15-year-olds that are going to be playing with this kind of technology moving forward. So I think that we vastly underestimate the willingness of younger generations to pick up some new technology and start doing things with it, and accepting it as part of like everyday life, right? Like my youngest daughter at one point walked up to a giant display ad in a Best Buy and tried to push on it, right? Because she was expecting it to be a touchscreen. She just expected it. It was normal. So that kind of, like, everybody looks at like the AR and the XR and anything else. Maybe it's going to come. I don't know. It seems a little silly. I think it's a little obtuse to dismiss it so cavalierly. I think that the younger people will pick it up and it'll start to become more and more a real thing, especially given the number of people that are investing in that area. It is, like I said, despite the fact that I think a lot of these companies are VC or equity backed, it's probably one of our biggest areas of growth right now. We have a lot of new customers, maybe not revenue wise, but net new customer wise, definitely. And they're doing some interesting things. If you're in the metaverse quote unquote world, you've probably heard of Spatial.io. They're a customer of ours that's doing in-browser 3D spatialized audio movements using an avatar that as you get close to somebody, your volume goes up. As you walk away, the volume goes down. All of that stuff running over our platform, which was never designed out of the box to be a quote-unquote metaverse play. It's all using WebRTC, right? And they have a progressive experience that starts in a browser and then goes to a headset once you want to step out of that, and you can continually get more and more advanced with your experience. Those are the things that are like literally happening now, and they're monetizing it through different ways. Those guys are using NFTs and digital art and so on. Other folks are doing it more in the gaming world, plugging in Unreal as opposed to Unity. I mean, it's a thing, it's happening, there's people doing it, and there's people that are, when I first started in the AR world, I remember probably for the first 5 years, I don't think I saw a single person making money. Like, everybody was losing money left, like, and not small money, big money, like a lot of money. Nikki, it's like what you went through. It's like $100 million? Yeah, sure. That kind of crap. That's what they were doing. Now the spend is down a little bit. They're not quite spending as much, but they're producing things that other people are starting to pay for. We did one of our customers did a hybrid circus. So you could actually go downtown Vancouver, which is where I am here, and you could go and see a circus performance, like a Cirque du Soleil kind of thing, in person. And then you could watch it in real time, streamed into a browser, or you could go all the way and say, have a VR experience in your headset. That's a metaverse experience, right? Like, that's the concept of a hybrid digital in-person thing. So, and they sold tickets that people paid. So
It feels remiss to not mention the elephant in the room, though, that is Meta, when we talk about the metaverse, and when we talk about losing money and losing lots of money. That feels like the most obvious example of how not to do metaverse. I'm still struggling to see what the real need and use is. Entertainment, yes, but when you're talking about entertainment at a large scale, then it needs mainstream adoption. And I still think that we're several years away from mainstream adoption. And I think that what Meta is doing or not doing is actually, as the marketer, really bad for the brand of metaverse as a whole, both from a B2B and a B2C perspective, right? Because now you have a sort of, metaverse has entered the pop culture vernacular by virtue of what's happening to Facebook/Meta, but not in a good way. So I think it has repercussions in the business world as well as with the everyday consumer.
do you think it'll get a rebrand? I mean, don't forget, we used to call the internet the information superhighway.
Yeah, I think it'll have to be honest, because there's just so much baggage right now.
So there's a fascinating thing's been happening in the last few days with the rise of Mastodon and the kind of Mindspace failure in Twitter. I think that that's tied here. Like the Web3 ability to financialize niche products that is really interesting, and I think it's particularly interesting for things like metaverse apps. where your Circus app is a one-off. Like this, they're literally selling tickets, and those tickets could be like NFT version tickets. Like so, I think there's a. I think for me, I think if the metaverse takes off, it will be a relatively fragmented metaverse that maybe interoperates at some level, and that's going to be paid for at the point of consumption through some kind of Web3-ish, crypto-ish coinage. It's not going to be like Meta as the organization, the ex-Facebook organization, I think isn't going to succeed in that. I don't think it's a single monolithic solution.
Let's hope not, for the sake of open source, which I know is important to pretty much everyone here, and we need to end on that note, since we've gone over a bit here, but I think it's fair to say that for a few more years at least, the bread and butter of probably all of us on this panel will be more traditional, maybe occasionally even boring video call applications. But if we can hang on for a few more years, we'll all be in our goggles and doing something more exciting with it. And my avatars will have legs. So let's all thank our panelists. Thank you for joining us today.